Sometimes people don't fall in love with who someone truly is, they fall in love with the attention, the comfort, or the idea of being chosen. Emotional attachment can blind you to disrespect, inconsistency, and red flags. The hardest truth is that love without honesty and effort is just emotional dependence. One of the most painful lessons in dating is realizing that feelings alone are not enough to build a lasting relationship. People leave for many reasons: timing, immaturity, fear, selfishness, or emotional unavailability. Heartbreak teaches that your value is not determined by who stayed or who walked away. When you don't value yourself, you start begging for bare minimum attention, over-explaining your feelings, and tolerating emotional confusion. But real growth happens when you stop chasing validation and start protecting your peace. The strongest relationships come from two emotionally healthy people, not one person trying to heal through love. There's a dangerous thing that happens when someone gives you attention at the exact moment you feel emotionally empty. It doesn't even have to be real love at first. Sometimes it's just consistency, a few good morning texts, a late night phone call when you feel alone, someone remembering little things about you that nobody else notices. And before you realize it, you're no longer attached to the person, you're attached to how they make you feel. That's the part nobody talks about enough. A lot of people think they fell deeply in love, but if they're honest with themselves, what they really fell in love with was relief. Relief from loneliness, relief from feeling invisible, relief from carrying life alone for too long. And when someone finally comes along and makes your heart feel seen, you start building emotional roots before you even know who they truly are. I remember watching a friend go through this. She met a guy during one of the hardest periods of her life. She was emotionally exhausted, doubting her, feeling forgotten by the world around her. Then suddenly this man appeared and gave her everything she had been craving emotionally. He listened to her, checked on her, told her she deserved softness after all the pain she'd been through. And for the first time in a long time, she felt safe. But safety can become addictive when you've been emotionally starving. The problem was, she started falling in love with the feeling before paying attention to the reality. She ignored how inconsistent he was, ignored the moments where his words didn't match his actions, ignored how he disappeared whenever things got emotionally serious. Every red flag became something she tried to explain away because attachment has a strange way of making people negotiate with their own intuition. When you're emotionally attached, you don't see clearly anymore. You start focusing on potential instead of patterns. You replay the good moments in your head to excuse the painful ones. You tell yourself, they're just going through something, or nobody's perfect, while slowly abandoning your own emotional needs just to keep the connection alive. And the saddest part is that sometimes people stay in painful relationships not because they're deeply loved, but because they're deeply attached. There's a difference. Love brings clarity. Attachment brings fear. Love feels honest. Attachment feels desperate. Love allows peace. Attachment makes you anxious every time the phone gets quiet. You can always tell when someone is attached instead of genuinely loved because their happiness starts depending entirely on another person's behavior. One text can make their whole day. One cold response can destroy their confidence. They stop feeling emotionally stable because they handed someone else control over their self-worth. That's exhausting. And eventually reality always catches up. My friend found out that the man she was fighting so hard to keep was giving half-hearted energy the end. He liked being needed more than he liked actually loving her. He enjoyed the emotional comfort she gave him, but he wasn't truly prepared to carry the responsibility of her heart. And once she realized that, it broke her in a way she didn't expect, not because she lost him, but because she lost herself trying to hold on to someone who was never holding on to her with the same intensity. That's what emotional attachment can do. It slowly convinces you that losing someone else would be more painful than losing your own peace. So you tolerate confusion, mixed signals, emotional distance, empty promises. You become loyal to memories while ignoring present reality. And healing from that kind of heartbreak is different because it forces you to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself. You realize how much of the relationship was built on emotional dependency instead of emotional balance. You realize you were trying to fill internal emptiness with external affection. You kept asking someone else to validate a value you should have already seen within yourself. That realization hurts, but it also changes you. Because eventually, after enough disappointment, you stop romanticizing inconsistency. You stop calling emotional unavailability complex. You stop confusing temporary attention for genuine commitment. You begin understanding that real love should never require you to constantly betray your own intuition just to maintain connection. And something powerful happens when a person finally learns the difference between attachment and love. They stop chasing people who confuse them. They stop begging for reassurance from emotionally unavailable hearts. They stop shrinking themselves to fit into relationships that only survive through one-sided effort. Instead, they start choosing peace over emotional chaos. They start recognizing that being alone is far less painful than being emotionally abandoned by someone standing right beside you. Hat kind of self-growth doesn't happen overnight. It usually comes after heartbreak, after disappointment, after nights spent replaying conversations in your head wondering why someone who claimed to care could make you feel so unloved. But sometimes heartbreak is the only thing strong enough to wake you up. Because the truth is, attachment can make you ignore reality, but reality eventually forces you to see who was truly loving you and who was only teaching you how much you still needed to love yourself first. One of the hardest things to accept in love is that someone can genuinely care about you and still not stay. That truth breaks people because most of us were raised to believe that love is supposed to conquer everything. We think if the connection is real enough, if the feelings are deep enough, if we give our whole heart, then the ending should be different. But life has a painful way of teaching that emotions alone do not guarantee permanence. Sometimes people love you anyway. Still leave. And when that happens, it creates a kind of heartbreak that is difficult to explain because there's no clear villain, no dramatic betrayal, no single moment you can point to and say, that's where everything died. It's just two people slowly realizing that love and readiness are not always the same thing. I remember a man telling me about a relationship he thought would become his forever. He met her when both of them were young, uncertain, and still trying to figure themselves out. They built a bond slowly. Late-night conversations turned into emotional dependence. Shared struggles created intimacy. They became each other's comfort during difficult years, and after a while, he couldn't imagine life without her in it. He truly believed she was his person. But what he didn't understand at the time was that love can exist even when two people are emotionally growing in different directions. As the years passed, she started changing. Her dreams changed, her priorities changed. The things she once tolerated emotionally no longer felt acceptable to her. She wanted more stability, more maturity, more clarity about the future. Meanwhile, he was still emotionally stuck in survival mode, trying to heal parts of himself he never confronted. He loved her deeply, but he didn't know how to love her in the way she needed anymore. That's the painful part nobody prepares you for. Sometimes relationships don't end because feelings disappear. Sometimes they end because growth creates distance that love alone cannot close. He told me the breakup confused him because she cried while leaving. She held his hand and said, "I will always love you." And that sentence destroyed him more than anger ever could have. Because if she still loved him, then why was she walking away? For months, he replayed that question in his head. But eventually, he realized something most people only understand after heartbreak. Love is only one part of a healthy relationship. Timing matters. Emotional maturity matters. Communication matters. Stability matters. Effort matters. Two people can care deeply about each other and still fail because one or both are not ready to carry the responsibility that real love requires. That realization hurts because it forces you to stop romanticizing emotions and start understanding reality. A lot of people stay emotionally trapped in the past because they think the existence of love should have guaranteed a different ending. They keep replaying memories, trying to figure out how something that felt so real could still fall apart. But relationships are not built only on feelings. Feelings are the beginning. They are not the foundation. And heartbreak changes you when you finally understand that. It teaches you that someone leaving does not automatically mean you were unworthy. Sometimes people leave because they are lost within themselves. Sometimes they leave because fear controls them more than love does. Sometimes they leave because they haven't healed enough to sustain healthy connection. And sometimes people simply arrive in your life to teach lessons they were never meant to stay long enough to complete. That doesn't make the pain easier. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes after losing someone you truly believed in. The mornings feel quieter. Music sounds different. Even ordinary places become emotional because everything reminds you of the life you imagined together. You mourn not only the person, but the future you created in your head, the trips you planned, the conversations you thought you would still be having years later, the version of yourself that existed when they were beside you. And for a while, heartbreak makes you question everything. You question whether love is even real. You question your judgment. You question whether opening your heart again is worth the risk. Because once you experience someone becoming a stranger after being your emotional home, trust becomes difficult. But heartbreak also reveals something important. It reveals where you abandoned yourself trying to keep someone else. The man eventually admitted that during the relationship, he ignored his own emotional struggles because he was so focused on keeping her happy. He depended on her presence to feel complete. He avoided healing because loving her distracted him from confronting himself. And once she left, he was finally alone with all the pain he had been running from. At first, that loneliness nearly destroyed him, but over time it rebuilt him. He started learning how to emotionally stand on his own. He stopped measuring his worth by whether someone chose him. He began understanding that self-worth cannot depend on another person's ability to stay. Because people are human. They change, they leave, they get confused, they make mistakes. And if your identity is attached entirely to another person's presence, their absence will always break you. That's why healing after here. Break is not just about moving on from someone else. It's about reconnecting with yourself. It's about learning that being left does not make you less lovable. It's about understanding that some people were chapters, not lifelong destinations. And most importantly, it's about realizing that just because someone couldn't stay in your life forever doesn't mean the love was meaningless. Some people enter your life to awaken parts of you that would have otherwise remained asleep. Some heartbreaks exist to force growth that comfort never could, because sometimes the deepest lesson love teaches is this: not everyone who loves you will stay, but every person who leaves will show you something you needed to learn about yourself before life moves forward. There's a moment in almost every painful relationship where a person stops recognizing themselves. It usually doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, quietly, in ways that seem small at first. You start overthinking simple conversations. You reread messages searching for reassurance. You become afraid of saying the wrong thing because you don't want the other person to pull away. Little by little, your emotional stability begins depending on someone else's mood, attention, and consistency. And that's when love starts turning into self-abandonment. I remember talking to a woman who spent years trying to prove her worth to someone who only gave her love in small, inconsistent pieces. In the beginning, he made her feel special. He called her beautiful every day, told her she was different from anyone he had ever met. He gave her just enough affection to make her emotionally invest deeply. But once he realized how attached she had become, everything changed. The effort became inconsistent. The communication became confusing. Some days he acted like she meant everything to him, and other days he disappeared emotionally without explanation. And instead of walking away when the inconsistency started hurting her, she started working harder to keep his love. That's what low self-worth often looks like in relationships. You begin believing that if someone pulls away, the solution is to give more of yourself, instead of questioning why the relationship only survives when you are the one carrying it emotionally. So you over-explain your feelings. You tolerate disrespect because you fear losing the connection. You become patient with behavior that is slowly destroying your peace because attachment convinces you that holding on is the same thing as love. She told me there were nights she cried herself to sleep wondering why she wasn't enough for him to love consistently. Think about how heartbreaking that is. A human being questioning their value because another person lacked the emotional maturity to love properly. And sadly, this happens every day. People lose themselves trying to earn love from emotionally unavailable people. They start measuring their worth by response times, effort levels, and temporary attention. One sweet message gives them hope again. One cold moment destroys them emotionally. Their entire self-esteem becomes tied to another person's behavior. That is one of the most exhausting ways to live. Because when you don't truly value yourself, you become willing to accept almost anything just to avoid being abandoned. You stay in conversations that drain you. You remain loyal to people who constantly confuse you. You ignore your intuition because deep down, you fear loneliness more than mistreatment. But eventually, emotional exhaustion catches up to everyone. The woman told me there came a day when she looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back at her. She used to be confident, joyful, emotionally free. But after years of begging for reassurance and chasing consistency from someone emotionally unavailable, she had become anxious all the time. She felt emotionally small. Even her happiness started depending on whether he was giving her attention that day. And that realization broke something inside her. Not because she realized he didn't love her properly, but because she realized she had stopped loving herself properly too. That was the beginning of her transformation. Healing didn't happen immediately. At first, she still missed him, still checked her phone hoping he would change, still replayed old memories wondering if things could somehow go back to the beginning. But slowly, she started confronting uncomfortable truths about herself. She realized she had spent years trying to be chosen by someone while never fully choosing herself. She realized she accepted bare minimum affection because deep down she didn't believe she deserved more. She realized that every time she ignored her own emotional needs to keep the relationship alive, she was teaching herself that her feelings mattered less. And once a person becomes aware of that pattern, they cannot unsee it anymore. That awareness changes then. Way you love forever. Because self-worth changes your standards. It changes what you tolerate emotionally. It changes how quickly you walk away from inconsistency, manipulation, and emotional confusion. When someone truly values themselves, they no longer chase people who are unsure about them. They no longer romanticize emotional unavailability. They no longer mistake attention for commitment. Instead, they begin protecting their peace, and protecting your peace is one of the deepest forms of self-love. It means understanding that not every connection deserves access to your heart. It means recognizing that love should not constantly leave you anxious, insecure, and emotionally drained. Real love does not require you to beg for clarity. It does not punish you with silence. It does not make you feel difficult for having emotional needs. Healthy love feels safe. But people who grew up emotionally neglected often mistake chaos for passion because chaos feels familiar. They become addicted to emotional highs and lows without realizing stability is what real love actually looks like. That's why healing is so important. Because until a person heals their relationship with themselves, they will continue confusing emotional suffering with emotional depth. The woman eventually left the relationship, not because she stopped loving him immediately, but because she finally started loving herself more than the pain of staying. And that decision changed her life. She began rebuilding herself slowly, spending time alone without feeling empty, learning how to validate herself emotionally instead of depending on outside approval, setting boundaries without guilt, saying no without fear of abandonment. And with time, she became someone entirely different. Not colder, not harder, just healthier. That's what self-worth does. It doesn't stop you from loving deeply. It simply stops you from losing yourself while doing it. And maybe that's the lesson most people learn too. Late. The quality of your relationships will always reflect the quality of the relationship you have with yourself. Because when you finally know your worth, you stop begging people to give you the love you should never have had to fight for in the first place.